Saeed Kadir, and I'm the data engineer for the Hanlon Labs. I'll be conducting today's seminar. With me, I have Akshad Gowal, who will be aiding me today. So before I jump into today's topics, I just want to outline next week. So next week, we're going to be going over the Capital IQ and Bloomberg platforms. Monday from 2 to 3, same place, same time. But next week we will be holding those seminars, and that following Thursday we'll also be doing the same seminar, the Capital IQ and Bloomberg ones. So just a reminder that we will be having those two set up next week. And the objective of today is basically to get you guys more familiar with the Thomson Reuters database, kind of help you guys navigate through what you may need in order to request these databases, as well as to kind of overall get you more familiar with the entirety of what Thomson Reuters has to offer, right? So since Thomson Reuters database isn't an open access platform, like WRDS and Capital IQ, what you're gonna have to do is put in your request to the Hanlon Labs. So if you navigate to the Hanlon Lab website, which is fsc.stevens.edu, under the resources tabs, you're gonna go ahead and select the request resources, and then that's gonna take you to a Google Forms list. Now you can either, if you're on a mobile device right now, you can scan the QR code. It's gonna take you to that same form. When you get to this form, what you're gonna have to do is basically just fill out your credentials. It's gonna ask you for your basic information, your name, email ID, and whatnot. And the important part to note here is this category of request sections. Now these are the two topics that we're gonna be covering: the Thomson Reuters tick history and the Thomson Reuters news analytics. So if you guys want to request something later today or right now, you guys can. So just indicate which one you'd be requesting for. After that request, there's a small description section where you'd basically just indicate what exactly you're looking for, the parameters and whatnot. And the last thing that you'd have to add is your advisor's email. Now, once that's sent in and processed, the advisor will have to go ahead and approve you. After that approval process, it gets sent to the Hanlon Labs teams, where I myself or a lab assistant will basically reach out to you and send in a send sort of like a consultation, set up a consultation where we would go over the different parameters that you may need just to get a better understanding of what you're looking for. Now, this can be done via Zoom or in person, but you'd set that up after you go ahead and send this request. So the first thing we're going to be going over is the Thomson Reuters tick history and trade level data. So basically, how this is structured is we have a bunch of asset classes in which you can choose from. Some of those asset classes are stocks, equities, and CDSs. The main popular one is option chains. We get a lot of requests for those, but do note that there's a bunch of asset classes that you can choose from. So then we'd go into the subcategories for these different asset classes. The first one would be the trade level data. And basically at this level, you can find things such as the bids and asks for each different company and stock. And you can also add certain variables like the highs and lows for each different stock. Now, the second category here is the tick level data. Now, this is the high frequency level data at the tick level. A lot of students ask for this because different platforms do have tick level data, but they don't have it as high as what Thomson Reuters has to offer. And again, you can add different variables such as the opens, lows, highs, and closes for this as well. So just to note that this high level frequency data is something that's really sought after. So just take a note of that. And again, this request has to be sent in via the Google form that I mentioned in the previous slide. So here is just a highlight of TRTH, the interface and the platform itself. Since you guys don't have access to this interface, I just went ahead and highlighted the bunch of asset classes in which you can choose from. As you can see, there's CDSs, option chains, features, and a whole list of things that you may or may not need. So this is just a good visualization on your different options and what Thomson Reuters has to offer. To add to that, here are the different frequencies. As I mentioned, Thomson Reuters has a high level frequency. It goes from 1 second all the way to 1 hour. So again, a lot of students do ask for one second data because of its high level frequency. And this is just to illustrate on the different things that you can add to your data set searches. So here's a sample data set where from Thomson Reuters, just to give you an illustration on what you may come across when you're getting these data sets. As you can see, this is an option chain for Apple, and you can see some of the variables that were added, which is some of the variables that were added, like the strike price, as well as the high bids and lows, the ask and bids for those, as well as whether the contract is a call or a put and the expiration date. So this is just to kind of add a visualization aspect to something that you may come across and to get you more familiar with a data set that Thomson Reuters has. So the next one is Thomson Reuters News Analytics. Now, this one, Akshat will go over, give you guys more in-depth detail, as well as give you sort of like a demo on, how to go about accessing this database, because it's a little different from the majority of what we have. So he's going to go ahead and talk more about that.
So the next database that we're going to talk about is Thomson Reuters News Analytics. So this is a very interesting database. So all the typical data sets that you see mostly talk about stock, ETFs, or the historical prices. Whereas in this database, what we have is basically a lot of historical news that you can use for your machine learning project or for your NLP projects. Now, this database is interesting. So how this database is managed is, there are two ways you can access this database. Moving on to the next slide. So there are basically two ways by which you can access this database. The first way, which everyone prefers, is to use the Postgres version of it. So with the Postgres version, that database is managed by Stevens. So our lab assistants manage those database, update those database, make sure it's updated till like last month. So you don't have to do the Python scripting on that to just manage the database. You can just go ahead, if you know SQL, you can use SQL, or you can connect that database into your, let's say, Tableau, Power BI, or however you want to visualize it, you can do that. Or the other way to do it is we can give you access to raw files through FTP, and then you can write your own Python scripts to convert it into a database, and then you can do whatever you want to do with that database. And in terms of coverage, this database covers almost all the exchanges in America, APAC, and EMEA region. So that covers all the majority exchanges. So going through the next slide over here, what I've done is basically I've highlighted a structure of the news. So how Thomson Reuters defines the news is basically they define the news into main three components. One is an alert. Alert is basically something which they sent out immediately as soon as the news breaks out. Let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say something happened in IBM. So first they'll send out an alert that IBM stock price, or maybe IBM had let's say a server crashed in IBM. So first they'll send out an alert, and then after some time, when they have the full update of the story, then they'll complete the news break. That is when they'll update the body of the article and say that detail out what actually happened at IBM. And then if there's an update to that story, they'll send out an update to that particular story. So now what happens with this is, in the database that they provide, they have different flags for all the statuses. So alert could be one status, news break could be one status, update one could be one status, and you have flags with which you can recognize what stage is it. So we'll see this when we actually go and see the live demo of the database. And the next I want to talk about is the data formats, which is important. So we have three main data formats. One is the Postgres one, which we always recommend you to use, that is managed by Stevens. And the other two in the raw formats. In the raw, you get two formats. One is JSON, one is CSV, whichever you prefer. Both are updated every month. So it's almost every time updated. Next, I think I want to go over the official documentation. So there is this documentation. We'll share the link on chat. This is a documentation which Thomson Reuters has provided to Stevens, and this documentation basically covers everything about the database, how the naming convention is done. So if you're not sure that if you want to use a database right now, you can just go over this documentation once and see if that database is of interest to you or not, because there's a lot of stuff involved in this database which you can see in this documentation. And I think so. I think one thing. So they do. So this is what I was talking about: the evolution of a story, how a story is structured. That is something very important if you just want to understand the database. And I think rest of it is just the naming convention of what kind of naming convention do they follow. And so if you want to just understand what's happening in the database, so it would help you. So going to the presentation. Next is basically how a database looks like. Now what I'll do is basically I'll try to share my screen, and can stop sharing. Yeah. So now basically what I'll do is I'll show you a snapshot of the database on my system. I'm muting my. Can you mute this one? So now what I'll do is I'll show you a snapshot of the database on my system. So here I have a Postgres database open. So in the Postgres database, as you can see, we basically have this. When you get the Postgres access from Stevens, you basically get access to this news database. And in the news database, we have four main tables: news, news audience, news info, and news subject. I'll talk about news sentiment also. So with the news table is basically, it just have, as you can see, news ID. That's it. So that's a primary key for us. Then you have another table which is important, is a news info. So news info is the table which actually contains all the details of the news. For example, over here you can see that I've already queried the top 100 rows. So what it provides us is the main body of the news, headline of the news, uh, take sequence, message type. Take sequence is basically the sequence in which a news was updated. Now over here you can see that this is the alt ID for all the news are same, because they're talking about the same news break, but it's just that the same article got updated. So the content of the news changed, but the alt ID or the unique ID with which it's recognized, it's pretty much same. So you know that they are still talking about the same story. And in the order is also over here. You can see as 1 2 3 4 5 6 is the order by which the same story was updated. And message type is basically the flag with which they are able to differentiate a news break from a alert and update. So one is basically a news break. One is basically a alert, sorry, the first alert that you get. Two is basically the news break where you have the full body of the news. So now you can see, as in this row, that we have the body.
we have the news body here. We have the news body here when it changed the news type. So this table just has the news body, news headline, m- sequence of the news, what type of news it is, urgency level of the news, what's the data provider, RTRS is Thomson routers, month news, that's it. And then the next main component is how can you filter this news based on ticker, right? So there's this another table called news audience and news subject. News audience is basically which will have ticker. Now, if you just want to query data for IBM, you can find out all the news IDs from here for IBM ticker, and then you can just write a join query, which will give you like all the news related to IBM between for certain months or for certain year. So that way you can get that kind of filtered data, which could be very helpful when you're doing some kind of analysis. You can also extract data for certain exchanges. If for example, if you just want to look at all the news in NYSE, you can filter out all the news in NYSE and just do your NLP model on that, or some kind of analysis you want to do on that. So that is also possible. And the other way to access this same database is through FTP or through Linux machine. So if you apply for that Linux machine, you will get access to a FTP server like this. And over here we have some raw files. It's the same database, just in raw format. So now over here you can see we have two formats. One is JSON and one is flat. Flat is CSV. We'd prefer to use that because it's much easier if you're using Python or R to convert this database. So now you can see here, this database is, there are two files. One is news and one is score. So scores is basically the sentiment analysis data. Thomson Reuters also provides us with sentiment scores. So in the scores file, you'll have the sentiment score, which is calculated through Thomson Reuters proprietary model. And in the news file, you'll just get the news, which uh, which you can collect for all the historical years. Yeah, with I think with that we pretty much cover up the databases we planned out for today. I'll hand it over to Syed.